to the FanDuel Optimal Lineups and Stack review for NFL Week 14. I'm Jason Gilbo at jgilbo11, and a quick review of last week. Obviously, Drew Brees was a featured part, so the GPP stack was, right off the bat not good. Pretty disappointing given the fact that they had a decent home matchup against the Lions, which, secondary has turned it around over the last 5-6 weeks. And I think that one was just basically, the cherry on top of the sundae at that point. So last week, Optimizer was on David Johnson, as it really has been all year. Hard to not get off of him. But also using Melvin Gordon there with him. We also saw Golden Tate, a great pairing, Travis Kelce, Denver defense, and Brandon LaFell in the cash lineup. So given Drew Brees ownership in cash games, you should have done pretty well with that lineup. If you played at GPP, it was probably pretty hit or miss, given the fact that you didn't have a couple of those plays around him. So overall, hit and miss week. This week, it's a little bit different. We don't have a lot of high totals, a lot of mid-range options. And we also got our optimizer kind of going in on the Packers this week in a home matchup against Seattle. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And going over the cash game lineup here first, Aaron Rodgers taking on Seattle. The pricing discount, usually this is a guy who's one of the higher priced quarterbacks. He's not. Projection, cafe value hasn't really changed on him really over the last few weeks, even in some tougher matchups. So I like Rodgers this week. I think he's more of a GPP play for me. I'll talk about the guy who I like, who pops up in the GPP lineup. So for me, it's just a flip-flop type of deal. But obviously, I think the loss of Earl Thomas is a big thing for Seattle, especially given the fact that the pass rush has been lacking a little bit of late. I think there is some general upside with this Packers team, and given the price discount due to the matchup, I'm willing to take some shots with it. So I like Rodgers here, but more of a GPP play. And then moving to the running backs, we look at Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson. These two high usage, high floor, high ceiling backs. I think this is the week to pay up for them in both of them together. So I do like that move quite a bit, given the fact that there is a lot of value at wide receiver this week. There's value at tight end. We use a kicker in defense that's not relatively expensive here. So I definitely don't mind it. I think, Bell and Johnson are the guys you can go with. Talk about them a little bit here, with those numbers. Johnson double-digit targets in each of the last 3 games, averaging 130 all-purpose yards per game this year. Bell's averaging 145. He's also starting to find the end zone a little bit more. You look at these guys, they're just used. If they're not going to get it done on the ground, they're going to get it done in the passing game. If they're not going to get it done in the passing game, they're going to get it done in the running game. So both have, decent matchups in those regards, expensive, but they're the highest projected backs, and it's really hard to get off of them this week. So, I'm definitely down for that core. I think in all formats, even with the ownership, given the fact that you can be different at quarterback and at wide receiver this week. So there's definitely ways to be contrarian without moving off of those top, running backs there. So wide receivers this week, Emmanuel Sanders, 5,900. Obviously quite a discount here going up against a Tennessee secondary that's really struggled this season. One thing to note here is obviously Sanders has been quite boomer bust. I like him here. I think this is a relatively nice price to take a shot at, because you're basically getting a wide receiver 3 price, and Sanders is a guy with immense upside. So, while the floor is not completely the safest, I don't think he's going to kill your lineup if he doesn't have a great day. I definitely see kind of 60, 70 yards being a relatively good floor for him this week. Hopefully he can find the end zone. And obviously this is a guy who's been getting about 9 targets per game. So he's been, used heavily. And this is a great matchup here on the road against Tennessee. Not a good secondary, so definitely fire away there. Golden Tate, another one here, 6,300. So obviously came up a little bit in price, and that's only $400. So, the algorithm not quite bumping him up after a big game against New Orleans. Decent matchup here against Chicago. They're middle of the road against wide receiver ones, which I relay Tate at this point as being their number one. Marvin Jones banged up, no run game. It's business as usual here for Detroit in a home matchup against the Bears. Stafford's been very solid this season. You're going to see Golden Tate with a relatively decent floor just based off catches and yardage. And also there is that touchdown upside this week. So definitely like Tate. To round out kind of this middle tier, Tyrell Williams, 6,800. Obviously, I was a little bit worried about the shoulder injury last week. It's a shoulder injury he played with through college. Didn't really hinder him. He did find the end zone. Great matchup here against Carolina. They struggle against wide receiver ones. San Diego's in a decent spot there in terms of the passing game. So I like Williams. Obviously, a good cash game play. I mean, basically in non-Denver weeks, he's been one of the more reliable, cheap options. So you can certainly fire away. Jordan Reed likely not going to be out this week. So, I mean, you're looking at Vernon Davis as a cheap kind of punt option at tight end. I think last week, I mean, obviously, Arizona's a tougher matchup, but he did kind of what you expected him to do at a bare minimum. And I think you can raise that floor and ceiling a little bit this week in a better matchup. So I like Vernon Davis here. I think, given the fact that you are paying for two high, running backs, you don't really need to go that way. So Dan Bailey, decent option here as long as the weather's okay. Josh Lambo, you can always check out Denny Carter's kicker article if you want some good kicker picks. He's, been not on in the last few weeks. And then defense here, Minnesota's a good option against, a pick six viable Blake Bortles, as we talked about last week with Denver. So I'm more inclined to pay up at defense usually, and that's the case again for me this week. Moving down to the GPP lineups, saying Golden Tate, David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, but we get Andrew Luck here, and I like Luck quite a bit this week. Houston's been struggling over the past 3 games, 2.7 passing touchdowns allowed per game. Luck is in a decent spot at a decent price. We get the correlation play with Hilton there, 7,600. We do take a dive at one of the wide receiver spots, but still keep Tate. Taylor Gabriel, interesting play this week. Obviously, Mohamed Sanu not healthy. Julio Jones not healthy. Jones expected to still play. Sanu up in the air. Taylor Gabriel's in play regardless of who's healthy or not. Going to face off against EJ Gaines. Not a good cornerback. Is allowing the 0.40 fantasy points per route run. Being targeted quite a bit. So I like Gabriel there. Relatively high, high ceiling for him. So a good tournament play there for the price. A good team total to target, so I certainly like that. Overall, though, I mean, I think there's generally, just as much upside here as there is with most of the lines that come out. So Andrew Luck, T.Y. Hilton, I like that correlation. Basically in a playoff game there, they got to win. Home matchup, Luck's been very solid at home. We get the upside of Bell and Johnson and Tate. As we've seen, Vernon Davis, gets that touchdown, can definitely pay off that price tag handsomely. Matt Prater in a home matchup against Chicago, sure, 4,900, a little expensive, but I'm fine with that. Punting with Tampa Bay is probably the only question mark I have here. I look at New Orleans obviously coming off a bad week, but I think, there's still going to be a team that scores 20-plus points against this Bucs defense. That certainly has been improving, but I just think Breeze in this offense and passing attack will rebound here. So, I think as cheap as I can go, I actually don't mind the Jaguars as a punt option. So if you can work them in somehow, they're, I believe they're 4,200 or 4,300. It's not a bad option this week against Minnesota's, offense that's really struggling. I like the Jacksonville corners. You can take Diggs out of the game. The offensive line and running game hasn't been good. So I think that's kind of where I'd go. I mean, that's the lowest total of the week. So I'd probably rather go there than Tampa. So stack this week, it's Packers, and I'm not surprised because of the pricing and the projections that are still coming out. We still get the running backs. We still get Vernon Davis. Once again, that punt defense, on my take, there's Josh Lambo. I know Denny Carter's on him this week. But so talking about the stack here, I mean, 35% of your salary, you're getting 2 high-priced backs. You're getting Golden Tate, one of the better value plays. And we're also looking at, who's Richard Sherman going to be covering. It's going to be a little bit of Jordy Nelson. It's going to be some Devontae Adams at times. I don't think we're going to see Sherman just follow him around 100% of the time. But, it also could be the case. It's Thursday afternoon. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that one because it is one of the more interesting matchups. So you look at this, 85% of Green Bay's touchdowns come through the air. They got a 3-touchdown total. They're at home. If the weather's bad, I'm going to be coming off of them a little bit here just because I don't think there's going to be tremendous upside in that type of a stack. I'd rather just kind of limit myself to using just maybe a Rodgers and Adams or just a Rodgers and Jordy or even just tossing in one of the wide receivers. So I'll certainly kind of look to come off that. I think Indy comes in as a good one. You also have Tampa. You have New Orleans as kind of good stacks as well. Pittsburgh is always an option. Even an Arizona stack if they can figure it out on the road here. So It's certainly an interesting one. I think there is a decent amount of risk here. Obviously, Seattle's still a good defense regardless of the injuries. But I'm looking at this offense that's been coming around. Obviously, Rodgers is, he's taken some heat in terms of immediate, but he's having a good season, a good fantasy season. I think with the price drop of all these names, Nelson at 71, Adams at 64, there's still upside here. They're still going to move the ball. I'm certainly fine with using this as a GPP stack, and I don't think many are going to be on it. So comparing a Packers offense with two of the best backs in the league, I think you're looking at a lot of upside here. So that's going to wrap things up with the FanDuel optimal lineup and stack review for Week 14. If you want to check out my article here, I break it down to even more, kind of talk about a little bit more in-depth analysis in terms of matchups on an individual basis. So you can definitely check that out. Be sure to check out our cheat sheets as well. They are up in the dashboard if you're subscribed to our site and all the rest of our Week 14 content.